The first tremor came as a sound only the dog seemed to hear. On the ridge above Lone Cedar Valley, Ethan Ward sat alone in his late aunt's mountain cabin, listening to the storm chew at the roof. The power had already flickered twice. One more outage, and his satellite phone and his last link to town would die with it. Beside the cold stone hearth, Scout lifted his head, ears, pricked eyes locked on the floorboards as if something moved beneath them. He growled, low and steady, then barked once sharp, backing away. The lights dimmed, the radio hissed, and the cabin floor answered his dog's bark with a hollow knock. Scout's bark echoed in the cramped cabin, swallowed quickly by the rising wind outside. Ethan froze one hand, hovering over the lantern wick as the storm rattled the shutters like a restless fist. The knock hadn't been loud, just a dull thud from somewhere beneath the planks, but it carried weight, the kind that didn't belong to shifting timber or winter air. "Easy," he whispered, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Scout stepped forward again, hackles up, nose pressed to a narrow crack between boards. Another rumble passed through the cabin, faint but deliberate, as if something below had shifted its weight. Ethan forced a breath, scanning the room, lit only by the lantern's thin flame. No footsteps, no branches scraping, no reason for the dog to act like the mountain itself had exhaled. The clock on the wall ticked once, then stopped. Scout whimpered, backing toward Ethan's leg, gaze fixed downward. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe the storm was playing tricks. But then the floorboard beneath Scout lifted a fraction, just enough to catch the light. Ethan stepped back, pulse hammering. Whatever waited under this cabin, it wasn't asleep anymore. The lantern flame wavered, throwing uneven shadows across the cabin's log walls. Ethan Ward stood perfectly still, listening to the storm grind against the mountainside. But beneath the wind, beneath the hiss of rain sliding down the windows, he heard it again, a soft, hollow shift under the floorboards. Scout pressed closer to him, the dog's warm shoulder brushing his leg. The shepherd mix was 5 years old, battle-trained in scent work, and perimeter alerts, a partner Ethan had trusted in quieter deserts and louder nights. But Ethan had never seen him like this, ears flattened, tail, low nose quivering with a restrained urgency. "That's not the wind," Ethan murmured. Scout glanced up at him, then back at the floor as if insisting. Ethan knelt slowly, resting his palm on the cold planks. He waited breath, held heartbeat loud enough to drown out everything else. Nothing. Only the faint shudder of the storm settling deeper over Lone Cedar Ridge. After several long seconds, he pushed himself to his feet. "Whatever it is," he said quietly, "it can wait till morning." But even as he spoke, he felt the lie. Storm or not, something was wrong here. The place had always smelled like elder cedar and moth-eaten quilts, a scent he remembered from childhood summers spent here before life had turned sharper. His Aunt Clara had been a solitary woman, kind but distant. A nurse who'd retired young after seeing one too many nights, as she'd said. She'd lived alone for decades in this cabin, perched halfway up a forgotten Montana ridge. Now it was Ethan's. His inheritance, or his burden. He stepped around the room, steadying the lantern. Its glow revealed details he hadn't noticed last night when he'd arrived exhausted from the long drive up the mountain. A row of faded postcards tacked above the mantel. A wool coat still hanging by the door as though Clara might return at any minute. A stack of her old field journal's pages curled from years of wood smoke. Everything was exactly where she'd left it. And yet, something was off. Scout paced the perimeter again, sniffing with methodical precision, not anxious calculating. Ethan brushed a hand over the back of the worn armchair Clara used to sit in. "You, sensing something I should have noticed sooner." Scout paused, met his eyes, and gave a short, almost scolding huff. "Right," Ethan said. "Show me." Before Scout could move, lightning split the sky, turning the window white. The resulting thunder shook the cabin hard enough that dust fell from the rafters. Ethan shut his eyes for a moment. Storm still hit old wires in him, and not the harmless kind. He wasn't a man who startled easy, but thunder had a way of peeling open memories he'd spent years patching over night raids, radio chatter dissolving into static, the hollow blast that had taken a portion of his hearing and a chunk of his confidence. He'd come here because the quiet promised to be gentler. Because the valley below, with its quiet diner and slow-moving post office, felt like a place where a man could relearn his own breathing. But the quiet here wasn't gentle tonight, and the storm felt too familiar, too much, like an old world clawing at the windows. Scout bumped his knee, bringing him back to the present. Ethan nodded faintly. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm here." He exhaled slow until the trembling in his hand faded. Ethan pushed the door open to check the perimeter. A wall of cold air slammed into him, filled with the wild tang of pine resin and wet granite. The ridge was steep, and the cabin sat on a kind of natural terrace carved out decades ago when Clara's father built the foundation. Beyond the porch, the ground fell away sharply into a forested slope, dark silhouettes of pines rising like cathedral spires in the storm. The mountain always breathed differently than the valley. Down below, wind moved in steady currents. Up here, it curled unpredictably, funneling through rock crevices, echoing into hollow dips, turning one gust into something that sounded like a whisper and another into a low hum. Tonight, though, the wind wasn't humming. It was pushing, driving inward like a force trying to reach the cabin. Scout barked once at the darkness head high, body rigid. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "You're hearing something, aren't you?" The dog's tail flicked in frustration. Ethan stepped back inside and barred the door. The wood groaned under his hand, old but reliable. Clara had reinforced it with steel bolts long before she died, as though she'd expected to defend herself against something. Or someone. He turned toward the hearth. The embers glowed faintly, but the warmth didn't push far. A thin draft slithered across the floor, lifting the corner of a rug near the center of the room. That shouldn't happen in a sealed cabin. Ethan walked toward it, kneeling slowly. Scout circled once, nose pressed to the rug's edge. When Ethan lifted it, the floorboard beneath revealed a thin, dark seam, a cut impossibly straight. He ran his fingers along it. Hidden access. Clara had never mentioned a crawl space door. Ethan whispered, "What were you hiding?" The storm roared louder outside. He pushed himself to his feet again and leaned against the table. His reflection flickered in the window, tired eyes, stubble shoulders, stiff not from the cold but from the years behind him. At 37, he wore the look of someone who carried too much but spoke too little of it. People in town had quickly learned he wasn't rude. He just used his words carefully, like someone counting ammunition. After leaving active duty, he'd tried city life for a while, crowded apartments, office jobs that required politeness he couldn't force. None of it fit. The noise pressed too close. Sounds he should have ignored baked into his senses. He never slept more than 3 hours at a stretch. But Scout had stayed with him through it all, the dog's steady presence grounding him in the world he couldn't always trust. Aunt Clara had been the one person who didn't push him to adjust faster, or be grateful he made it home. She'd simply invited him to visit the cabin. "Whenever you need quiet, Ethan, it's here." And then she passed unexpectedly, leaving him a cabin full of silence, and one night filled with hollow knocks under the floor. Scout eventually settled near the hearth. Ethan crossed the room and lowered himself onto the floor beside him. The dog pressed close, offering comfort without asking for any. Ethan scratched behind his ears, feeling the soft fur warm beneath his fingers. Outside, lightning flickered. The storm thickened. But inside this one small, worn-out cabin, there was a tiny, fragile pocket of peace. "Wish she'd told me more," Ethan whispered, "about why she came up here alone." Scout blinked slowly, leaning his head on Ethan's knee. Ethan's voice softened. "Guess we both ended up here trying to outrun something." Thunder cracked overhead. Scout didn't flinch. He only listened again to the floorboards. That was the grace note of the night, Scout's quiet refusal to be afraid for himself. He was only afraid for Ethan. A sudden whistle of wind squeezed through the rafters, making the lamp flicker. Ethan rose and checked the back window. When he did, he froze mid-step. A shape moved outside. Just a shadow, likely a tall pine swaying, but it had looked inhuman. He held still, breath caught. Scout stood hackles up again. Ethan whispered, "I saw it." Scout's tail stiffened. Together they approached the window. Ethan cupped his hands around the glass to see through the reflection. Nothing but storm-dark pines. But the hair on the back of his neck rose. In combat, he'd learned to respect instincts that whispered someone is watching you. And right now, that instinct crept through him like a cold thread. He lowered the lantern wick until the flame shrank to a thin, trembling bead. Less light inside meant better seeing out. The storm rumbled. Scout touched his nose to the floorboards again. Ethan's gut tightened. Focus, he told himself. The mountain wasn't just learning his presence, it was responding. Hours passed in uneasy silence. Ethan tried reading through one of Clara's journals, but half her entries were cryptic, missing dates, odd symbols, references to the lower ledger and the ridge signals. At midnight, Scout's head snapped up again. Ethan whispered, "What now?" The dog moved to the center of the room, nose glued to that same floor seam beneath the rug. Ethan grabbed the lantern, knelt, and pressed his ear to the wood. A second later, a faint, deliberate scrape sounded from below. Not storm-made, not animal, not random, a human noise. Ethan jerked upright, pulse hammering. Scout growled, dark and low. Ethan's whisper was barely breath. "There's someone under us." The wind slammed the side of the cabin, the shutters banging like warning drums. Ethan slowly reached for the handle of the hatchet hanging by the hearth. Scout stayed beside him, trembling, not with fear, but with the effort of holding himself back from barking again. The scrape came again, closer, just beneath Ethan's knees. He whispered, "We're not alone, boy." And the lantern flame blew sideways, as if something beneath the cabin exhaled. The scrape beneath the floorboards stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Ethan knelt, frozen hatchet in hand, the lantern dimmed to a weak halo of gold. Scout stood beside him in a rigid point stance, head low, body, tight tail, straight like a drawn arrow. The dog's nose twitched once, twice, then he let out a quiet, throaty rumble. Ethan whispered, where Scout pressed his nose to the wood again, then looked toward the hearth, as if urging Ethan to move. Ethan followed slowly, each step deliberate. He reached the brick lip of the old stone fireplace and pressed his palm to the cool floor. He felt it instantly, a vibration, faint, rhythmic. Not wind, not storm. Movement. Someone was beneath the cabin. A bolt of cold swept up Ethan's back. "This doesn't make sense," he whispered to himself. Crawl space shouldn't be that deep. And Clara didn't. A sudden knock jolted him to silence. One sharp rap directly under the plank he'd lifted the rug from earlier. Scout jerked back, barking once an explosive protective warning. The lantern flickered violently, then went out. The loss of light was total. No glow from the hearth, no electricity to fall back on. Just the black of the storm-filled night pressing in from every direction. Ethan didn't breathe. He held Scout close with one hand and steadied his hatchet with the other. In the dark, another sound emerged. Soft, subtle, but unmistakable. A whisper of air rising from below. Not a voice, not an animal. A draft, from an opening. Something beneath the floor had shifted enough to change the airflow in the room. Scout's claws clicked against the wood as he repositioned himself, ready to leap, ready to protect. Ethan whispered into the darkness, "Easy. I'm right here." Scout's warm shoulder pressed into his leg. The dog trembled with adrenaline, not fear. Ethan knew the difference. He fumbled for the lantern sparks and wick scraping in the dark. It took 3 tries before a flame caught trembling itself awake. The weak glow reassembled the room in pieces, the hearthstones, the table legs, Scout's tense outline, the slight rise in a single floorboard seam. Ethan swallowed hard. "What are you trying to tell me, Clara?" he whispered. The floor answered with a soft thud, one more deliberate signal. He wasn't imagining it. Someone or something wanted to be found. Everything in Ethan's training screamed the same instruction: don't investigate alone. Call for backup. Retreat. Reassess. But the mountaintop had no cell service. The landline Clara once kept was dead. The satellite phone battery had dipped toward red earlier. And even if he reached someone, help wouldn't arrive until morning. Scout nudged him again, impatient. Ethan exhaled shakily. "All right, we check it. Carefully, but you're staying close." He crossed to the tool bench beside the pantry. Clara's old pry bar hung on a hook, rusted but solid. He grabbed it. A fresh gust of wind rattled the windows, and for a heartbeat he imagined the mountain watching him. He returned to the hearth. Scout moved beside him, tail-stiff ears pinned forward. "On my count," Ethan whispered, not because Scout needed instructions, but because Ethan needed to hear his own voice steady. He slid the pry bar into the seam of the floorboard and leaned gently. The wood lifted with unnatural ease, as though it had been opened recently. Scout growled low. Ethan lifted the board and set it aside. A cold draft rushed upward, damp and rancid earth-stale moisture and something metallic beneath it. The lantern light illuminated the opening. A wooden staircase. Narrow, steep, leading into pitch black. Ethan's breath fogged faintly in front of him. Scout leaned forward, nose pressed toward the dark. Ethan whispered, "You smell it too. It wasn't just earth down there. It was something older, something kept hidden for a reason." He hesitated, lantern trembling in his hand. Clara was meticulous, organized, purposeful. If she'd carved out a hidden cellar beneath her cabin, she'd done it with intention and caution, not carelessness. But why hide it from him? Scout whined a soft, urgent note that said, "Move." Ethan's heart hammered. "Yeah," he muttered. "I know." "We go down." He knelt and lowered himself onto the first step. The wood creaked under his weight. Cold air wrapped around him instantly, like plunging into a forgotten room of winter. Scout followed without hesitation, pressing his shoulder against Ethan's thigh as they descended. The staircase ended in a tight subterranean chamber. The lantern illuminated stacked shelves of jars, sealed boxes, old medical supplies, and a far back wall lined with metal file drawers. Ethan whispered, "What the... Clara, what were you doing down here?" Scout approached the left side of the chamber nose, pressed to an overturned crate. He whined sharply, nudging Ethan's hand toward it. All right, Ethan murmured, setting the lantern down. He flipped the crate upright. Inside was a heavy canvas satchel. He unbuckled the clasp. Inside were a sealed envelope addressed to Ethan Ward, a metal tin marked C.W. Ba, a set of keys, and a small leather-bound notebook with Clara's initials burned into the cover. A chill slid down Ethan's spine. She'd left this for him. Scout pressed against him, sensing the shift in his breathing. Ethan lifted the envelope first. His name was written in Clara's neat cursive. His hands shook. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Ethan, if you are reading this, it means the mountain has awakened sooner than I hoped. Do not trust the noise above you. Do not trust the man who follows the storms. You must finish what I could not. The files below will explain everything. Take Scout and leave before he arrives. I'm sorry I left you with this burden. Clara. Ethan read the letter twice, each pass colder than the last. Do not trust the noise above you, meaning whoever or whatever he'd heard earlier wasn't an accident. Do not trust the man who follows the storms. What man? No one lived this high on the ridge, not anymore. Leave before he arrives, which suggested that Clara had been afraid, not of illness, not of dying, of someone who wanted what she had hidden. Scout suddenly stiffened, ears shooting upward. A new sound filtered down the staircase. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, intentional. Ethan's blood drained to ice. Someone was inside the cabin, inside his cabin, and they were moving toward the open cellar door. Scout bared his teeth, a low rumble rising from deep in his chest. Ethan blew out the lantern, instantly plunging the chamber into pitch black. He crouched low, one hand, gripping Scout's harness, the other, sliding silently toward the hatchet at his belt. The footsteps reached the top of the staircase. They paused. A shadow broke the faint sliver of dim light from above. Someone was standing at the opening. Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears. Scout's growl vibrated against his leg. Then the intruder spoke, one quiet line that fell like ice into the dark. Clara, you shouldn't have sent him here. The voice was male, calm, unhurried, and it wasn't talking to Ethan, it was talking to Clara, as if she might still be listening. Darkness thickened around Ethan like a second skin. He crouched beside Scout in the cold subterranean chamber, muscles locked, breath measured. The intruder's silhouette remained at the top of the stairs, tall, wide-shouldered, blocking nearly all remaining light from the cabin above. The stranger didn't step down. He just stood there as if listening to the darkness itself. Scout trembled, but not from fear. His entire body coiled like a spring about to launch. Ethan's hand tightened around the hatchet. He shifted his weight silently, taking care not to disturb the loose grit on the floor. The man inhaled slowly through his nose like someone savoring a scent. Then he said quietly, "You kept your mother's habits, Ethan." Ethan's blood froze. Scout snarled a deep, vibrating growl that filled the chamber. The stranger's tone remained maddeningly calm, always sitting in the dark, always listening first. "Clara taught you well." Ethan didn't speak. Couldn't. His throat felt like it had locked shut. The stranger chuckled softly, a warm, almost pleasant sound, but with the weight of someone used to making others flinch. "Then I'm going to close this door. When you come up, we'll talk properly." He began to lower the trapdoor. Ethan surged upward, ready to intercept, ready to strike, but Scout pressed hard against his leg with a sharp huff stopping him. A warning, the angle is bad. Don't. Ethan froze just as the wooden hatch shut with a heavy final thud. A metallic click followed, a latch sliding into place. They were sealed in. The stranger's footsteps moved away from the hatch, unhurried, confident, as if he believed time belonged to him. Ethan stayed on one knee, heart-pounding, listening until the footsteps faded into stillness. Only then did he exhale. Scout nudged his hand, sniffing his knuckles, grounding him in the dark. Ethan whispered, "Good call. I would have walked right into it." Scout's tail thumped once. Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead. His fingers were ice cold. Someone knew his name. Someone knew Clara. And someone knew exactly where to find them. He forced himself to inhale slowly and think. Assess, plan, act, not panic. Ethan retrieved the lantern and relit it, shielding the flame with his palm so it wouldn't flare too bright. The small room reappeared around them, dusty shelves, medical supplies, file drawers stacked like miniature coffins. He turned Clara's letter over, reading again the words that now carried more weight. "Do not trust the man who follows the storms." The man upstairs had approached during a storm, as if the weather itself signaled his arrival. Ethan folded the letter and slipped it into his jacket. "First things first," he whispered. "We find another way out." Scout moved ahead, sniffing each wall. The far right corner caught the dog's attention. He pawed at a spot where the dirt met a stone slab. Ethan knelt, running his hand along the edges. The stone had been fitted into the wall, deliberately smooth on the front but rough on the sides, where someone had pried at it before. He set his shoulder against it and pushed. Nothing. He stood. "Help me out," he murmured. Scout sat beside him, comically unhelpful for pushing stone, but his presence steadied Ethan enough to think again. He scanned the ceiling. The beams were reinforced, not meant to collapse or budge. He returned to the stone slab and studied its left edge. Dirt had settled loosely there, not packed like the rest of the wall. He dug his fingers into it, cold grit roots loose soil. He pulled until his nails bit raw. A faint seam revealed itself beneath the dirt. A second door. Low. Hidden. He and Scout could crawl through it but not walk. But it led somewhere. And somewhere was better than being trapped with whoever stood above them. He hooked his fingers under the edge and pulled again. The slab moved an inch. Ethan whispered, "There we go." Scout barked softly, tail wagging encouragement. Ethan pushed harder. The slab finally tilted outward, revealing a narrow passage. Cold air rushed through it sharp with the scent of stone and pine roots. Scout sniffed deeply, then looked at Ethan with an eager glint. "Yeah," Ethan muttered. "We're taking it." He slung the satchel over his shoulder, grabbed the lantern, and crawled into the passage. It was tight, the ceiling low enough that it brushed his back. Scout stayed ahead, tail straight alert. Behind them, the slab remained slightly ajar. Ethan left it that way just enough to hear if someone opened the hatch upstairs again. But the cabin above remained silent. Unnaturally silent. The passage ran 15 feet before opening into another chamber, smaller, colder, lined with rock walls slick from decades of condensation. Roots hung low like chandeliers of twisted fingers. Scout stopped halfway into the room, lowering his head. Ethan approached slowly. The lantern revealed a makeshift cot. Thin blanket, rusted water tin, a wooden crate used as a seat, and a gnawed pencil beside a stack of papers. Someone had lived down here, recently. Ethan's breath hitched. "Clara, what were you into?" He lowered the lantern to the floor. The papers scattered across the crate were faded printouts, weather logs, atmospheric readings, coordinates, seismic activity charts. At first glance, irrelevant. But on each page in Clara's handwriting was the same phrase: "The storms are not natural." Ethan stood frozen. Scout nudged the papers, then sniffed the cot. The sheet still held a faint scent. Human, male, familiar. Ethan's stomach tightened. He was here. The man upstairs, the one who knew Ethan's name, Clara's habits, the cellar's existence, had used this cot. He'd spent time underground. He knew how to move through this cabin like it was his own. Meaning he had access long before Clara died. Meaning he hadn't arrived last night. He'd been watching, waiting. For Ethan. Scout sat at Ethan's feet, eyes sharp. Ethan whispered, "We're not just up against a trespasser. This man knew her. Maybe he was the reason she lived up here, alone." The realization left a sour taste in his mouth. He checked the far wall. Another narrow tunnel branched off, angling down toward the old mining shafts that dotted the mountainside. The tunnel was reinforced with beams, rusted nails, splintered edges, old marks of tools scraping rock. Clara didn't build this part. This was older, maybe a remnant of the abandoned mining network. Ethan lifted the lantern high, letting the weak flame stretch its glow as far as possible. The tunnel curved out of sight. Scout's ears, perked nose twitching toward the dark. "You hear something," Ethan whispered. Scout took one careful step into the passage. A faint echo drifted toward them, not mechanical, not natural. A voice, far away, muffled by stone. A man's voice. Scout's growl dropped low and steady. Ethan killed the lantern instantly. The flame vanished. The tunnel went black. Darkness always opened the same door in his mind. Sandstorms, static. A radio screaming nonsense between bursts of clarity. He was back in Afghanistan for a heartbeat, the last mission before his discharge. He heard the sergeant's voice, "Ward, keep your head down, wait for the window," and he'd waited. And the winds howled. And Scout then, barely 2 years old, had pressed against him in that same protective way. A mortar had landed too close. Shrapnel, screams, static, silence. It was only the dog's frantic barking that pulled him back to clarity. Ethan blinked hard, dragging himself into the present. Ranger's breath warm against his knee anchored him. No desert, no gunfire. Just a mountain tunnel, a stranger above, and Clara's mystery in his pack. He whispered, "I'm here. I'm back. I'm here." Scout nudged his palm reassuringly. Slowly, Ethan relit the lantern. The room returned in fragments. Scout's eyes reflected twin pinpoints of gold. Ethan cleared his throat. "All right, we're going to follow the tunnel. But this time we stay quiet." The dog dipped his head once affirmative. They moved into the narrow passage. Ethan hunched low. Roots brushed his shoulders, dirt raining in small sifts. The voice ahead, male quiet, echoed again, but he couldn't distinguish words. It sounded like a man talking to himself or muttering while working. Scout paused, sniffed, then stepped forward with extreme caution. The tunnel widened slightly, giving way to a larger cavern. Ethan lifted the lantern. His breath caught. In the center of the cavern was a metal hatch embedded in the ground. Industrial, heavy, bolted shut with reinforced brackets. On its surface, partially covered with dust, was a symbol stamped into the steel U.S. Weather Service Restricted Access. Scout barked once sharply, then backed away, tail tucked slightly. Ethan stared. A government hatch beneath his aunt's cabin. His voice cracked a whisper. "What did you get mixed up in, Clara?" The hatch looked wrong in the earth, like a piece of city pavement dropped into a wilderness no one had bothered to ask permission from. Ethan stepped closer, lantern held low. The metal was old, but not ancient, dull gray edges, scraped where tools had pried at it in the past. Faded yellow paint still clung to the rims, spelling out a warning, half swallowed by grime. "Restricted access," he murmured. Scout circled wide around it, nose wrinkling. His chin dipped, ears flattening in an unease. Ethan respected instantly. "You don't like it," Ethan said softly. Noted. He crouched, running his fingers along the bolts. They were heavy-gauge industrial and recently oiled. He rubbed his thumb together. The residue was fresh, not decades old. "Whoever's been using this," he said, "they're still coming down here." The voice he'd heard earlier pulsed at the edge of memory. A low murmur, soft enough to be mistaken for distant thunder. He scanned the cavern. On the left wall, half hidden behind a curtain of roots, was a narrow metal pipe running upward, angled toward the cabin above. A faint hum vibrated through it, too steady to be wind. Ventilation, or communication. Scout stared at the pipe nose, lifted, listening. "You hear it too," Ethan whispered. "Someone's talking." He pressed his ear to the cool metal. At first only a faint rushing like air being funneled through a long throat, then beneath it words. Blurred but unmistakably human. Pressure drop. 90 minutes. Another spiral inbound. Ethan pulled back slowly. Storm talk. Not the way the weather lady on local radio rambled. Clinical. Measured. This was a report. He imagined the man upstairs, broad shoulders, steady voice, standing in the cabin, speaking into some device wired into this pipe, sending data, receiving orders. Clara's scribbled note floated back to him. "The storms are not natural." His mouth went dry. "Okay," he whispered mostly to himself. "So either this is the strangest coincidence on Earth, or somebody's been dialing up weather from under my aunt's house." Scout made a short, impatient sound, pushing his nose against Ethan's shoulder. "Yeah," Ethan murmured. "We need more than theories." He set the lantern on the floor and unzipped the satchel. Clara's notebook slid into his hand leather, cracked pages soft from years of turning. He flipped to the middle, hunting for anything that mentioned a hatch tunnels or the words stamped into the metal. He found an entry dated 3 years earlier. The ink pressed harder than usual, revealing the force behind her hand. "They want me to keep quiet about the Ridge Station. Said it was just a relic from an old weather project. Cold War paranoia, their words not mine. But the readings don't match natural patterns. The storms arrive on schedule like trains. Same rotation, same pressure trough, same static signature." Ethan's chest tightened. He read on. "I told them someone is still down there. Equipment moving at night. Generator hum. The last tremor woke the cabin. They smiled, said, 'I'm just used to the old place's noises. But I've lived in these boards for 20 years. The mountain is breathing different.'" Scout huffed softly, pressing his head against Ethan's elbow. "You heard it too, didn't you, Clara?" The entry ended with a final line underlined twice. "If Ethan ever comes up here, he deserves to know what's under his feet." He closed the notebook, swallowed hard, and looked down at the hatch. "What's under my feet," he said, "is apparently a government secret in a cabin nobody remembered except her." Scout's tail flicked once like a punctuation mark. Ethan rose, wiped his palms on his jeans, and gripped the hatch handle. It was thick, meant for gloved hands. He braced his feet, pulled. The hatch didn't budge. "Figures," he muttered. He tried again, putting more of his weight into it. Metal bit into his skin. The hinges groaned a fraction of an inch, then seized, locked from the inside, or maybe rusted at a crucial joint. Scout stepped forward, sniffed around the edge, then sneezed. "Yeah," Ethan said. "I know how you feel." He took a step back, the lantern flame circling shadows around the chamber, and let his mind shift from brawn to training. If you can't open a door, you do one of three things: find another door, find a way around, or make the door irrelevant. They couldn't blow it, no explosives, and he wasn't trying to collapse a tunnel on himself. Another entrance might exist further into the mining network, but that would mean leaving the direct path and wandering blind. He glanced at Scout, who stared at the hatch as if unsure whether to treat it as threat or target. "We're not going to get answers standing here," Ethan said, "and we're definitely not going to outweight that guy upstairs." The thought of the stranger back in the cabin jolted him. "What is he doing right now?" Ethan whispered. Scout's ears rotated toward the tunnel, listening. No voice now, just the distant hiss of wind pushing against rock. Either the man had stopped talking, or he'd left. Both possibilities were bad. Back to the cabin, back to the unknown reluctance, crawled over Ethan's skin at the idea of returning to the cabin. Instinct screamed to stay below, to follow the tunnel deeper away from danger. But the satchel on his shoulder reminded him Clara's files. The letter, the map, everything that could explain this was still scattered up there on her table. And the man who knew his name might already be going through it. "Come on," he said quietly. "We're going back up." Scout whined under his breath, but turned obediently toward the tunnel, trotting ahead. They retraced their steps through the narrow passage past the cot and the crate, and Clara's storm-scribbled notes. Back through the low crawl space. Back into the original cellar. Ethan paused at the stone slab, listening. Silence. Too complete. He pushed the slab open another inch and peered into the main cellar room. Lantern light slid across crates and shelves and the foot of the staircase. No shadow at the top now. No outline in the faint gap of the hatch. He exhaled slowly and began to climb Scout just ahead, his paws landing with eerie softness for a dog his size. At the top, the trapdoor gave under his shoulder. Whoever had latched it hadn't bothered to resecure it tightly. That was either arrogance or bait. He eased it open a few inches. Cold cabin air slid down, carrying the faint scent of wet wood and something else. Smoke, no, not thick enough. Just the ghost of a match burned not long ago. He pushed the door wider and emerged into the main room. Scout hopped up beside him, posture taut. The cabin looked the same, at first glance, same sagging beams, same sheets on the furniture. But the details betrayed a thorough intrusion. One of Clara's journals lay open on the floor, pages ruffled. The drawer of the old roll-top desk had been yanked out and left crooked. The curtain near the back window hung slightly off its hook, as if someone had peered out in a hurry. And on the table, centered with careful deliberation, sat a single item, a photograph in a cracked frame. Ethan's throat tightened. The picture showed Clara standing outside the very cabin they were in now. Her hair was tied back in a scarf, her smile faint but genuine. She couldn't have been more than 40. Standing beside her was a younger man in a field jacket, his hand shading his eyes from the sunday. Ethan blinked. The man's face was the same one that had hovered over the trap door. Older now, with more lines, but unmistakable. So the intruder didn't just know Clara. He'd known her long enough to show up in framed memories. Scout growled at the photograph, lips pulling back just enough to reveal teeth. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "That makes two of us." For the first time, Ethan really looked at the background of the photo. Behind Clara and the man, the ridge loomed in softer weather. The sky clear. The cabin newer. And just barely visible near the tree line was a structure he hadn't seen before, a skinny metal tower with instruments at the top, anemometers, gauges, small dishes pointed skyward. Clara in front, weather tower behind. He turned the photo over. On the back in Clara's handwriting, 2 words were scribbled: first partner. Underneath, in a different ink, someone had added a name in tight slanted letters: Dr. Avery Locke. Scout sneezed as if the name itself offended him. Ethan's jaw clenched. "So that's you," he murmured. "Doctor? Weather partner? Hatch builder?" He set the photo back on the table, resistance humming through his fingertips. "Why did you come back?" he whispered. "And what do you want from me?" The cabin answered with a low creak as another gust hit the outer walls. The storm hadn't passed. It was regrouping. Scout walked to the front door, sniffed the crack at its base, then glanced back at Ethan. The dog's eyes said it without words. He's gone outside. Ethan checked the latch. The door remained bolted from the inside. He scanned the windows. The back one, where the curtain hung crooked, had a smear along the frame. Mud. A boot scuff. He left the way we came in last night, Ethan said. Through the back. He moved to the window, parted the curtain slightly, and peered out. The clearing lay muted under a gray sky. Rain slanted in fine needles. The truck sat where he'd left it, droplets crawling down the windshield. No other vehicles. No movement among the trees. He's not stupid, Ethan muttered. If he parked, it's deeper in the woods. Or he never left the ridge at all. That thought sat heavy in his chest. Scout gave a short, urgent bark, breaking the tension. Ethan turned. The dog stood in front of the desk, nose pressed against the partially open drawer that had been ransacked. "What is it?" Ethan asked. He crossed the room and slid the drawer all the way out. Papers had been rifled through quickly, Clara's old medical notes, patient charts from her nursing days, tax forms. But in the very back corner, wedged against the wood, a manila envelope remained bent and forgotten. Scout nudged it with his snout. Ethan slid it free. Across the front in Clara's tidy script, 3 words, 4 eyes clean. He frowned. "Clara, that's not how that phrase goes." He flipped it open. Inside were photocopies, newspaper clippings, old letters. One headline stood out: Federal Weather Program shut down after ethics inquiry. Below it, a grainy photo of a younger Dr. Avery Locke in a suit shaking hands with a politician. Scout's head tilted. Ethan skimmed the article. Phrases leapt out. Experimental weather modulation. Funding discrepancies. Unauthorized field tests. Whistleblower nurse from Montana. Claims dismissed. Program classified. Personnel reassigned. A whistleblower nurse. In Montana. His stomach twisted. "Clara," he whispered. A notepaper clipped to the article bore her handwriting. "They called me paranoid. Said storms come and go. But storms don't arrive with clockwork precision. Someone was pulling the strings and I refused to sign off. They buried the story. Buried the station. But Locke never stopped. He just moved underground." Scout pressed his muzzle into Ethan's hand, anchoring him to the moment. Ethan's mind spun. Clara had blown the whistle on an experimental storm project. The program had been officially shut down. But judging by the hatch below and the storm growling outside like a trained animal, someone had kept the experiment alive. Locke. And Clara's final act had been to call Ethan here. "Why?" he whispered. "Why drag me into this?" The answer landed as soon as the question left his mouth. Because Clara trusted him to finish what she couldn't. Because he knew what it meant to stand up to power and be ignored. Because he didn't scare easy when someone told him to walk away. Scout barked once at the door. The storm outside cracked thunder marching over the ridge. A wall clock Clara had never wound slid its minute hand forward with a soft mechanical tick. Time moved. Ethan straightened. "All right," he said, voice low but steady. "If Locke wants storms, he's not going to like what blows back." He slung the satchel higher, checked the position of the hatchet on his belt, and looked down at Scout. "We're going to pay a visit to his station," he said. "But first, we need a map that isn't 20 years out of date." Scout wagged his tail once. The dog's eyes shone with the same thing Ethan felt finally stir beneath all the fear and confusion: purpose. He turned toward the door. The storm roared in approval. Ethan grabbed his rain jacket and slung the satchel across his chest. Scout planted himself by the door body, poised as if he already knew the plan. Get off the ridge, get to town, get answers. "Let's move," Ethan said quietly. He unbolted the door just as a gust of wind slammed it back against him. Rain whipped sideways across the clearing, needling his face. The sky churned low clouds, tumbling over the crest like rolling smoke. Scout stepped into the rain and immediately turned his head toward the left ridge, ears sharp. "I know," Ethan muttered. "He's still out there." But daylight was thinning, and if they wanted a chance to research Locke or track down the remaining fragments of Clara's work, they needed to leave while the road remained passable. They moved fast across the mud, Scout trotting close to his knee. Ethan opened the truck door, ushering the dog inside before climbing behind the wheel. The engine coughed awake. Ethan's eyes flicked to the cabin mirror. A lone figure stood at the edge of the tree line, just a silhouette unmoving. Ethan's breath snagged. "Locke," he whispered. But when he blinked, the shape dissolved into the drifting fog. Scout's growl rumbled from the passenger seat. "Yeah," Ethan said, throwing the truck into gear. "I saw him too." They rolled down the trail tires, sliding in the wet earth. The storm had carved ruts across the path, eating away the edges. Pine needles plastered the windshield. Every sharp bend carried the risk of a washout. But they pushed on. Cedar Run appeared through the mist, like a cluster of lanterns. The small town didn't usually glow this early. The storm had residents holed up in diners and general stores, lights burning warm behind fogged windows. Ethan parked near the old library, a brick building barely the width of his cabin. The The sign out front had lost 2 letters, now reading CEDRRN Pub IC Archive. Scout hopped out, shook the rain from his fur, and pressed close to Ethan's leg. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and the kind of heater that hums too loud in winter. A bell above the door jingled. No one else seemed to be around, except the librarian, a woman in her late 60s with gray hair tied back in a bun. Her name tag read Ellen. She peered over her glasses. "You look like you climbed out of the mountain's mouth." "Feels about right," Ethan said. Scout gave a tiny sneeze. Ellen smiled down. "And you got yourself a good one. What can I help you find?" Ethan hesitated. He'd practiced the lie on the drive down but discarded it the second he met Ellen's eyes. He couldn't afford half-truths. "Not now. I'm researching an old government program," he said quietly. "Weather-related. The name is Avery Locke." At the name, Ellen stiffened. Scout noticed instantly, ears tipping forward, body angling toward her. Ellen's eyes darted to the windows as if expecting someone to appear. "Why are you asking about Locke?" she whispered. "He showed up at my family's cabin," Ethan said, "and I found files. My aunt kept files about him, about storms that don't feel natural." Ellen exhaled shakily. "I haven't heard that name in 20 years. She stood abruptly. "Come with me." Ellen led Ethan and Scout down a narrow hallway and unlocked a door labeled Staff Only. Beyond it, a smaller room waited lined with filing cabinets older than Ethan. A single metal desk sat under a flickering lamp. "This," she said, "is where we keep things people forget." Her voice was delicate but weighted. She pulled open a drawer and flipped through folders until she found one marked Weather Service Project Cedar Sky. Ethan's pulse jumped. That name wasn't in Clara's files. "It wouldn't be," Ellen said. "The program was classified. Most of the documents were destroyed, but a few slipped through." She pushed the folder toward him. Ethan opened it. Inside were old photographs equipment hauled into the mountains by mule teams, towers rising from snowy ridges, technicians in bulky jackets, analyzing consoles with dials and meters. One photo hit him like a punch. A younger Clara stood beside Avery Locke outside a metal structure. Her expression wasn't warm, it was cautious, chin-tight eyes angled away from his direction. "You knew her," Ethan whispered. Ellen nodded. "She volunteered here sometimes. Quiet woman. But she warned me once, said if anything ever happened to her, someone would come asking." She swallowed. "She told me to show them this folder." Scout nudged the photo with his nose staring at Clara's face. Another document slipped out, handwritten notes. Storm 5B, arrival 1542. Storm 5C, arrival 1541. Storm 5D, arrival 1542. All identical rotation signatures, Ethan whispered. The storms were scheduled. Ellen's voice dropped. Controlled, or attempted to be. He felt the room tilt slightly. Locke believed he could manipulate weather on a small scale, divert drought, reduce fires, redirect blizzards. Good intentions. She tapped the folder. But somewhere along the way, he stopped caring about intention. Only results. Ethan stared at the photo of Clara and Locke. She quit the program. She didn't quit, Ellen said. She tried to expose it. Scout growled softly as though agreeing. Ethan leaned closer. "Why hide all this?" Ellen closed the folder with a trembling hand. After the inquiry, 2 things happened. The government buried the project. Locke disappeared. Disappeared where Ethan pressed. Ellen pointed to the mountain. Some people said they saw lights up there years after the shutdown. Not storms lights, like machinery. Ethan's pulse hammered. Clara's words echoed. "The mountain is breathing different." Ellen whispered, "I think your aunt kept watching him long after the program ended." And he knew it. Scout barked once sharply. Ethan's hand dropped to the satchel. "I need whatever else you have. Maps, logs, anything." Ellen hesitated, then nodded. "There's one more thing." She reached into a locked cabinet and slid out a folded map of the ridge. A red X marked a section northeast of Ethan's cabin. "What's this spot?" Ethan asked. Ellen's voice dropped lower. "That's where the original weather station stood. The official one. Before the tunnels and underground expansions." Ethan's pulse kicked hard. Scout pawed the floor next to him, restless, as though ready to run the moment Ethan said the word. He folded the map. "Thank you." Ellen touched his wrist gently. "If Locke's involved, you need to be careful. The storm tonight, it isn't normal." Ethan nodded. "I figured." He and Scout stepped out into the rain-damp air again. The sky above the valley boiled with dark clouds swirling in a tight radial pattern. Scout stared up, ears pinned. "Yeah," Ethan murmured. Clara was right. Storm's too smooth. Too fast. He opened the truck door. A slip of paper fluttered from under the windshield wiper. His name written in thin, spidery script, Ethan Ward. Turn back. The ridge belongs to me. A.L. Scout growled, nose wrinkling. Ethan crumpled the note. We're done running. He tossed the note into the passenger footwell. Come on, partner, he said, voice low and resolved. We're ending this tonight. Scout leapt into the truck, tail rigid. Ethan started the engine. The storm above the ridge pulsed with unnatural light. They drove back toward the mountain. Toward the truth Clara had died to protect. The road up the mountain felt narrower on the way back. Rain hammered the windshield in dense streaks, the wipers struggling to keep up. Headlights cut a tunnel through the dark, picking out pine trunks and sudden bends in wet gravel. The ridge loomed ahead like a crouched animal. Scout stood with his front paws braced on the seat, eyes fixed through the glass weight, shifting with every turn. The dog's body told Ethan everything. The sky wouldn't. This storm was wrong. The air smelled charged metallic the way it did near field generators in forward bases, not on a remote Montana road. Lightning forked in the clouds but rarely hit ground. It stayed up there circling like something being held in place. Storm 5B, 5C, 5D, Ethan murmured, remembering Clara's notes. Scheduled arrivals. Scout glanced at him, then back at the ridge, as if to say, we're driving into someone else's plan. Yeah, Ethan said quietly, and we're not invited. He pulled off the main track at a barely visible fork marked by Ellen's map, a narrow logging road long abandoned, 2 faint ruts choked with grass and stones. The tires bit and slipped. Branches scraped the sides of the truck, fingernails of bark on steel. Up ahead, the trees opened into a small clearing, cluttered with old concrete blocks and rotted beams, what once might have been a staging area. He killed the engine. The sudden silence rang in his ears, filled only by rain on metal and the far-off groan of thunder. We walk from here, Ethan said. Scout jumped down into the mud, shook himself, and trotted a few paces ahead, nose working the air. Ethan slung the satchel over his shoulder, checked that the flashlight and Clara's map were still inside, then locked the truck. A pointless habit maybe, but one he kept anyway. The path Ellen had marked climbed sharply from the clearing switch backing between dark firs. Their branches interlocked overhead, turning the world into a tunnel lit only by the occasional flare of lightning. They climbed in practiced silence. Scout set the pace careful but relentless. His tail stayed level, his movements controlled. Every now and then he'd pause, ears rotating like little satellite dishes, scanning for sounds beyond the rain. Ethan's lungs burned in the thin air, but his legs kept moving. Years of patrols had taught his body to obey, even when his thoughts drifted somewhere he'd rather not visit. You're not back there, he reminded himself as the sky flashed white again. You're here. Ridge, Clara, Locke. Stay here. Scout dropped suddenly into a crouch and gave a quiet, questioning whine. Ethan froze. What is it? He whispered. Ahead through the trees, a faint glow pulsed. Not lightning, not fire. A steady pale wash that grew and shrank in slow mechanical rhythm. Ethan's skin prickled. Station's up there, he murmured. Still running. They crept closer. The old weather station sat on a rocky outcrop like a metal fossil. 2 main structures remained, a squat concrete bunker, half buried in the hill, and a skeletal tower beside it, its lattice frame supporting a cluster of instruments, anemometers, old satellite dishes, and a set of long rods that hummed faintly in the charged air. The glow came from inside the bunker, seeping out around the weathered door, which hung slightly crooked on its hinges. Ethan crouched behind a boulder, Scout tucked in at his side. The wind screamed over the ridge but seemed to bend around the station, splitting in 2 currents like a river around a stone. Someone's still powering this, Ethan whispered. Generators have to be running below. Scout sniffed, then gave a quiet, uncertain whine. Ethan scanned the area. No vehicles. No footprints visible in the mud, though wind and rain could erase tracks in minutes. Still, the hairs on his arms stayed up. Locke could be inside. Or below. Or watching from the trees. You stay with me, Ethan whispered to Scout. If we move together. No solo heroics tonight. The dog huffed softly, which in Ethan's dialect meant obvious. They circled wider, approaching from the lee side of the bunker, where the wind died down. The concrete here was cracked moss, filling the seams. Faded stenciling above the door read U.S. Weather Station, Cedar Sky, authorized personnel only. Someone had spray-painted a crude X over the last line years ago. Ethan tried the handle. It turned. He eased the door inward. Warm, dry air rushed out, smelling of ozone and old machines. The bunker's interior glowed with the soft blue of aging monitors and status lights. Scout pressed against his leg. "Stay behind me," Ethan murmured. They stepped inside. The control room looked like time had flooded in, and then receded, leaving behind layers of old and new. Bulky 80-seconds-era consoles lined one-wall dials and analog gauges frozen forever at their last readings. Above them, newer equipment had been bolted on digital displays, showing wind speed graphs, radar sweeps, and blocky images of swirling cloud formations. A central desk held a laptop patched into a nest of cables, its fan whirring its screen alive with lines of code and a simplified map of the region. Over the map, spirals of color indicated precipitation and pressure systems centered not on the state or the county, on the ridge, on them. Ethan moved closer, heart thudding. Scout stayed at his heel, nose, twitching attention, jumping between the door and the equipment. The map's legend labeled the storm overhead not with a standard meteorological name, but with a project code SD-27, Guided Cell. Another window showed a countdown timer, next modulation, event 004317. 43 minutes, Ethan murmured, till what Scout stared at the timer as if he understood it was bad news. Ethan's gaze flicked to the notes scattered across the desk, pages of schematics, trade wind data, and in the margins, a familiar, sharp script. Clara's. He picked one up. Diversion now, primary function. No longer experimental. Locke is using the ridge array to tether systems here. Every storm held here is a storm that doesn't reach the valley. His pulse stumbled. Held here. He grabbed another sheet. Flood models show worst-case damage to Cedar Run and neighboring towns if SD cells are allowed to travel unimpeded. Locke insists this is protective heroism. But his methods are killing the ridge, landslides, soil erosion, people isolated and cut off. He doesn't care. Says sacrifice is part of the equation. Scout shifted nails, clicking slightly on concrete. Ethan read on throat tight. I demanded he shut it down. He refused. Told me if I exposed him, the valley would be the one to suffer. Turn off the tether, he said, and watch the river rise. The midpoint of Ethan's understanding buckled. He had come here to stop a man from playing God with storms. But the truth was more crooked. Locke wasn't just manufacturing weather. He was grabbing storms that would have hit the valley and pinning them to the ridge, using the mountain as a shield. Brutal, immoral, unconsented, but also partially effective. Sacrificing one piece of land to spare another. If I destroy this place, Ethan whispered, do I flood the valley? Scout looked up at him, eyes dark, waiting. Ethan's chest ached with the weight of it. The people in Cedar Run. The nursing home. Ellen in her archive room. All of them living under skies calmer than they should have been, because the ridge took the hits, because Locke redirected the worst of it, because Clara watched horrified from a cabin built on the very bullseye. He imagined turning the system off, letting the next guided cell go free. Would it spin out harmlessly, just another storm in the great weather engine, or would it slam into towns whose infrastructure had grown lazy under mild seasons? Clara's notes whispered again, they'll call him a savior if they never see the collateral. He swallowed hard. The goal he'd brought up the mountain, shut everything down and expose Locke as a fraud, suddenly felt too simple for the complexity in front of him. If he took the system out recklessly, people who didn't even know his name could die. If he left it running, the ridge would keep taking damage, and Locke would keep playing God. The objective isn't just stop him, Ethan murmured. It's replace him, redirect this, without letting it ruin everything he's been pretending to protect. Scout gave a small affirmative woof that echoed off the concrete. Ethan almost smiled, despite the knot in his gut. Looks like the mission changed, buddy, he said. We're not just saboteurs. We're inheriting a mess. The timer continued its steady countdown, 003902, 003901. He felt it in his bones now, the clock. Not just for the story, but for everyone down there who had no idea their calm evening depended on choices made in a forgotten bunker. For a moment, an old feeling surfaced, the one from operations where the objective flipped mid-mission. When destroy became secure, and secure became evacuate. The moment where every step forward required a new math of risk. His mind clicked into that gear faster than his fear could protest. First step, he said, we find out how to steer this without breaking it. Scout wagged his tail once. Ethan dropped into the metal swivel chair, fingers hovering over the laptop keys. Locke's password screen glowed at him like a challenge. He exhaled. Okay, doctor, let's see what kind of ego you typed with. The first two guesses were obvious combinations of project names and dates. No luck. The third he tried a phrase from Clara's notes, cedar sky, halo error. Fourth try, he paused, eyes drifting to a small Polaroid taped to the monitor's edge. Locke and a woman standing beside a child at a county fair, cotton candy and hand sky clear overhead. On the back of the photo, a single word was written in red ink anchor. Ethan typed it. The system accepted it with a soft chime. Scout huffed, almost pleased. The laptop unfolded its secrets. A control interface appeared full of sliders and toggles, labeled in jargon, Vector Adjust Cell Tether Dissipation Radius. A log window scrolled with lines of recorded events. Ethan skimmed a recent entry SD27 cell acquired. Tether ridge array 2 divided by status stable diverted from river basin zone 3 pop dense. Manual override A lock. He felt the reversal settle fully in his chest. Locke had saved people, and broken others to do it. The man was both arsonist and fireman. Ethan sat back, jaw tight. Maybe that's why she called me, he said quietly. Not to pick a side, but to end the way it's being done. The door behind him creaked. He spun the chair around, heart slamming. Locke stood in the entryway, rainwater dripping from his coat hair slicked back, eyes pale and steady. He'd aged since the photograph in the folder, but the core of him remained calm, measured frighteningly, sure. Scout's growl rolled through the bunker like distant thunder. Locke lifted his hands slowly, not quite in surrender, more as a man showing he wasn't holding a visible weapon. Seems you figured out the basics, Locke said, voice smooth. Clara always said you were quick. Ethan didn't stand. Quick enough to notice, you turned a mountain into a punching bag, Ethan said. Locke's mouth twitched. A punching bag that kept an entire valley from drowning. Perspective matters. Ethan gestured toward the glowing monitors. Playing God isn't a perspective problem. It's a moral one. Morality, Locke mused. A luxury people cling to when they don't have to make calculations with other people's lives. Thunder cracked overhead. The timer ticked past 003620. Locke glanced at it. We don't have time for a philosophy debate. The next modulation is coming. If you meddle without understanding, you'll get people killed. Ethan's voice stayed low. And if I walk away, you keep doing this forever. Locke studied him, really studied him for the first time. You're not Clara, he said. She watched from the edges and wrote her accusations in journals. You came straight to the source. He nodded once, almost approving. That makes you dangerous in a very different way. Scout edged forward, body coiled. Locke's eyes flicked to the dog. And there's your conscience on 4 legs. He took one careful step inside, closing the door behind him. Ethan felt the air tighten. Sit, Locke, said quietly. Listen. You're about to inherit a storm whether you like it or not. The timer glowed between them like a fuse burning down. The storm outside roared louder. Ethan realized the midpoint had shifted under him completely. He wasn't here to blow up someone else's system. He was here because Clara had left him the power and the burden to decide whether it lived or died. And he had less than 36 minutes to choose. Scout's head tipped toward him, eyes asking silently. What now? Partner Ethan drew a breath that felt too big for his ribs. Now he thought we learned enough to beat him at his own game. He met Locke's gaze. Then start talking, Ethan said. You've got until that timer hits 0. Locke smiled faintly. For the first time in a long time, he said, I might have someone who understands what's at stake. The storm pressed closer to the ridge, waiting. Locke stepped fully into the bunker, letting the heavy door ease shut behind him. The hum of the equipment filled the silence between them, steady, rhythmic, almost like the bunker itself was breathing. Scout circled to Ethan's side, positioning himself half a step ahead, body low, ready to spring, if the man so much as twitched wrong. Locke took note, but didn't flinch. He clasped his hands behind his back like a professor preparing a lecture. First rule of guiding a cell, he said calmly, you don't fight the storm, you groom it. Ethan kept one hand near the console, the other near Scout's collar. Save the poetry. I want mechanics. Why the tether? Why here? Why now? Locke nodded slowly. Because every valley down there, he gestured vaguely toward the windows, and darkness beyond relies on stability. Tourism, farming, infrastructure. Cedar Run barely survived the last 100-year flood, and another one is overdue. He stepped closer to the monitors. So, I built a net, he continued. A weather net. The ridge acts as the anchor point. Storms hit here instead of the valley. Ethan's jaw tightened. You didn't build a net, you hijacked one. This station is government property. The tower was abandoned, Locke cut in. And the algorithm's my design. The Valley Council approved the funding back when they thought it was just a research project. They knew nothing about the tether, of course. People rarely appreciate the engineering behind their good fortune. Ethan's voice sharpened. Clara appreciated it. That was the first time Locke's calm cracked. His jaw flexed. Just once. But Ethan saw it. She didn't understand the stakes, Locke said quietly. She saw injustice where there was simply necessity. She saw the ridge collapsing, Ethan snapped. She saw landslides. sinkholes, cabin trails wiped out. And you told her it was acceptable loss. Locke didn't deny it. People need villains when they're scared, he said softly. Clara wanted one. She chose me. Ethan leaned forward. You threatened her. Locke's silence confirmed it. Where is she now? Ethan asked, voice low. Locke didn't answer with words. He glanced toward the far corner of the bunker, toward a small steel door half-rusted shut. Scout's ears shot up, eyes pinned to the door. Ethan rose from the chair, slowly breath tightening. Open it, he said. Locke didn't move. Open it. Finally, Locke reached into his coat pocket, drew a small key, and tossed it onto the floor where it clinked against the concrete. His voice was barely audible over the storm. She never left the ridge. Scout bolted forward. Ethan grabbed him in time. No, boy. With me. They approached the door together. The key slid in stiffly, the metal squealing as Ethan forced the lock to turn. He pulled. Dust exploded into the air. The smell hit him first. Not decay. Not death. Chemicals. Storage. Cold. Inside was a narrow chamber lined with metal shelves, stacks of storm logs, binders, weather model printouts, old VHS tapes, a cot in the corner, a jacket draped over it, worn, faded, Clara's. Ethan exhaled shakily. She lived here, he whispered. You kept her here. No, Locke said softly behind him. She stayed here, her choosing. She wanted to watch the data herself, wanted to stop me, wanted to prove the tether was failing. But the storm cycles grew too strong. She couldn't leave the ridge. Ethan turned. And you let her die here. Locke's eyes flickered with something regret or annoyance. Hard to say. She ran into the storm 2 months ago, he said. Went up the tower during modulation. Said she was going to disconnect the rods manually. She didn't come back. For a moment, the world tilted. Ethan felt the cold of the bunker crawl up his spine. Scout whimpered softly, pressing against his leg. She trusted you, Ethan said. The words tasted like iron. She trusted you to protect the ridge. And instead, she forced my hand. Locke snapped suddenly. I told her the valley wasn't ready. I told her undoing it too fast would kill people. And she refused to listen. She died for the same reason you're here now, idealism. Ethan's hands curled into fists. The storm cracked above them, rattling the tower. The countdown timer beeped 002944. Locke turned back to the monitors. We can continue this after modulation, he said. For now, if you want to avoid a disaster, you'll help me steer SD-27. Ethan stared at the screen. The pressure cell was growing. Clara had tried to stop this the hard way, and it killed her. His pulse hammered. He stepped toward the console. Scout pressed against his knee, ready. Locke watched him carefully. So Locke asked, are you going to help me? Ethan reached toward the interface, then stopped, just shy of touching it. His voice was calm, but inside him a storm roared. I'm not here to help you, he said. Locke stiffened. But I am here to stop you the right way. Scout growled, low approval vibrating in his chest. Locke's eyes narrowed. The next words out of his mouth weren't a threat. They were something colder. You don't know what you're doing. Ethan met his gaze. I know enough. Lightning cracked again. The ridge trembled. And the timer slid to 002817. The storm and the truth accelerated toward them. Ethan placed both hands on the console. Tell me everything, he said. Fast. Locke stepped closer, but something in his expression shifted. Reluctance. Fear. Respect. He drew in a sharp breath. Fine, he said. Then listen closely, because one wrong move and the ridge won't be the only thing that breaks. Outside, the wind howled like it was waiting for someone to make the next move. The dark night of the soul was beginning. Locke moved to the main console with a precision that made Ethan's skin crawl. His fingers hovered above the sliders, not touching, almost reverent. Scout prowled a slow half-circle behind them, tail stiff, his gaze locked on Locke as if waiting for the moment the man betrayed his own instructions. The tether isn't just a leash, Locke began, voice clipped but steady. It's an anchor. Think of a storm cell as a living organism driven by pressure, temperature, motion. If you guide it wrong, you aren't stopping it, you're enraging it. Ethan folded his arms. And that's supposed to make me trust you, No, Locke said plainly. It's supposed to make you careful. He tapped the screen. A new interface appeared, filled with shifting color bands, thermal signatures swirling around a central spine. This is the ridge's updraft profile, Locke said. The mountain's shape creates a lift channel. Normally storms pass over it. But when the tether is active, Ethan finished the thought. The storm latches onto the channel like a hook. Locke nodded once. Exactly. You're beginning to understand. Scout growled. Locke's jaw twitched. The dog doesn't have to. Ethan placed a hand on Scout's head. He understands more than most men. They held each other's stare a beat too long before Locke returned to the screen. The timer pulsed again, 002603. Lightning slammed the ridge close enough to shake dust from the ceiling beams. The whole bunker thrummed like the belly of a machine powering up. Locke took a breath. "Here's what Clara never told you," he said. Because she didn't want to believe it. He pressed a command. A satellite view bloomed on the monitor, Cedar Run Valley, glowing in false color. "And here," he said, sliding a finger across the map, tracing a broad swath of land, "is what would have flooded 5 months ago." Ethan stiffened. The map showed the river swollen beyond its banks. Red blotches marked structural collapses. Blue overlays predicted evacuation routes, most of which passed directly through neighborhoods that would have been underwater. He swallowed. "Clara saw this," Locke said quietly. "She knew stopping the tether cold would unleash the backlog of storms we've been diverting. So she tried slowing it down," Ethan murmured. "Yes, and the ridge suffered for it." Locke's tone slid into something almost like grief. She wasn't wrong to try, but she was wrong to go alone. Ethan forced his voice steady. "She didn't go alone. She had you." Locke's eyes flashed. Pain, guilt, anger, all braided together. "No," he said. "She had a mission. And missions sometimes outgrow the people on them." He turned away. Ethan felt an old ache pulse, the ache of watching people justify collateral damage, because the math said someone had to pay for a greater good. He'd heard it before, in briefing rooms, in forward operating bases, in letters to families. Not again, not here. He stepped closer to the console. "Okay," Ethan said quietly. "Then show me this part." He pointed to a flickering red blotch near the mountain's edge. "What's that?" Locke hesitated, then pressed a key. The view zoomed in on the ridge, not the summit, not the cabin, lower, near a rocky shelf where a storm could be dragged like a net against a cliff. "That," Locke said, "is the sink point." Ethan frowned. "Explain." Locke's voice lowered. "It's where the tether dumps excess energy, like a drain valve. Without it, storms would recycle into the valley." Ethan felt his pulse hammering. Clara tried to disable it. Locke nodded once. "And that's why she died," he said. "She climbed the tower to cut the rods, but she didn't know the sink point would snap all that energy back into the ridge, straight into her." The room went silent. Scout pressed closer to Ethan, sensing the weight of the moment. Ethan swallowed hard. She never stood a chance. "No," Locke said, but she believed she had to try. Lightning cracked again, this time so close. The bunker shook and dust rained from the ceiling. The timer dropped to 002411. Locke's voice sharpened. "And now you think you have to try." Ethan's jaw clenched. "I'm not her. I'm not climbing your tower. I'm not throwing myself into your math problem." "No," Locke said. "You're about to do something far worse." Ethan stepped forward. "And what's that?" Locke's expression finally stripped itself down to the truth, raw, unguarded, sharp as broken glass. "You're going to take responsibility," he whispered. "You're going to choose who gets the storm." Ethan froze. This modulation, Locke continued tapping. "The timer isn't like the others. The cell coming in is too strong. If we tether it to the ridge, the ground gives. Landslides, structural collapse. Anyone on the mountain dies. And if we don't..." Ethan forced out. Locke turned to the valley map. Pressure lines thickened. Rain projections surged. Flood warnings blinked. Then Cedar Run takes the hit. Ethan felt the world tilt under him. The storm screamed above the bunker, a living thing waiting for its orders. Locke faced him fully. "You want the truth. You want Clara's justice. You want to protect this place. Then choose." Ethan stared at the timer. 002258. Scout whined, a soft, trembling sound. Ethan had only heard twice before. Once, in combat. Once, when they found Clara's empty cabin. It cut straight through him. Locke stepped closer, lowering his voice. "This is the part Clara never understood. You don't get to save everyone." Ethan's breath hitched. "You get one side," Locke said. "Valley or ridge." The storm slammed again, a monstrous roar. The console lights dimmed. The timer blinked. 002151. Scout pressed his head against Ethan's knee, steadying him. Ethan closed his eyes, saw Clara's handwriting, her cracked flashlight, her empty jacket, her notes. "He's killing the ridge to save the valley." He saw the people below, kids walking home, old veterans sitting on porches, Ellen locking up the archive, and the ridge crumbling under years of punishment. His aunt's cabin quiet, broken, the woods alive with secrets. He opened his eyes. His voice was low, certain, steady. "No," Ethan said. Locke's brow furrowed. "No." Ethan stepped forward, placing his hand over the console. "I don't choose one," he said. "I choose both." Locke's eyes widened. "That's not possible." Ethan leaned in. "It is," he said softly. "You just weren't willing." Scout barked once, sharp electric, like the spark of a fuse being lit. Ethan straightened. "You built a system to trap storms," he said. "We're going to build one that releases them safely." Locke stared at him. "Disperse the energy," Ethan continued. "Break the cell apart before it hits anything." "That requires." Locke stopped. His face went pale. 3 coordinated vectors. The tower, the bunker, and the sink point. Ethan nodded slowly. "And 2 people." Locke stepped back. "You're talking about a manual override on the rods," he said. "That's suicide." Ethan smiled, but there was no humor in it. "That's why I'm not sending a person." Scout's head tilted sharply. Locke blinked. "You can't be serious." Ethan knelt beside Scout. "Remember that harness we used in training," he whispered. Scout's tail thumped lightly despite the tension. Ethan looked up at Locke. "You're going to guide me through the controls," he said, "and Scout is going to trigger the rod release on the tower. The 2-location override." Locke stared in disbelief. "That dog will die." Ethan's eyes hardened. "No," he said, "he won't." The storm shrieked overhead, the tower humming like a live wire. The timer dropped again. 002012. Ethan rose. "Show me how to do this," he said. Locke's face went blank. "Please," Ethan added. For the first time since entering the bunker, Locke hesitated. Not in defiance, in fear. "In all my models," he whispered, "there was never a plan where everyone survived." Ethan placed a hand on the console firm steady. "Then let's write one." Scout barked sharp and ready, the sound of a soldier accepting the mission. Outside, the storm coiled for its final descent. Inside, 3 figures, man-dog and reluctant scientist, stood before a choice that would break them or bind them forever. Locke exhaled shakily. "All right," he said, "but understand this, Ward." He looked Ethan dead in the eye. "If we fail, we lose the whole mountain." Ethan nodded. "Then we don't fail." The storm struck the tower with a sound like the sky being split in half, and the dark night of the soul ended because the real battle had finally begun. The tower shuddered under a blast of wind, so strong the entire ridge seemed to bow beneath it. Metal groaned. Ice cracked along the support beams. The storm cell SD-27 had arrived like a fist with a mind. Inside, the bunker alarms howled. Red lights strobed across the consoles, bathing Locke's face in a feverish glow. He snapped into motion fingers, flying across switches with surgical precision. "Ward vector panel left side. Set the array to manual lock," he barked. Ethan didn't flinch. He dove to the left console, Scout glued to his heels as if tethered to him by instinct. His hands moved fast, toggling the heavy metal switches. "Array is manual," Ethan shouted. "Good, now we need sync," Locke yelled over the deep roar of thunder. Before the next oscillation, Scout barked once sharp at the ceiling. The tower above them flashed brilliant white as lightning struck the rods again, 3 hits in less than 10 seconds. The storm wasn't just following the tether now. It was fighting it. Locke's voice dropped low and urgent. "Once we begin the release sequence, you have 90 seconds to trigger the rod drop at the tower." 90. After that, the energy fold collapses and the ridge takes the full hit. Ethan met his eyes. And Scout Locke hesitated. If the rods drop clean, the surge vents upward. He'll have a narrow exit window. "Dogs aren't built for this kind of terrain, Ward." Ethan placed his palm gently on Scout's flank. "He's more than built. He's trained." Scout nudged Ethan's hand as if saying, "Stop worrying." Locke slammed a button. A mechanical whine echoed under the floor, deep ancient machinery waking. "The sync point just came online," Locke said. 2 vectors left. When they triangulate, the bunker vibrated so violently Ethan stumbled. The storm tears itself apart. Locke finished. Ethan steadied himself. "Tell me what to do." Locke straightened, the storm's glow flickering across his face. "Say goodbye to your dog." Ethan knelt, hands gripping Scout's harness. The dog stared back with total trust, total readiness. "You get down that tower and to the exit point," Ethan whispered, forehead pressed lightly to Scout's. "No heroics, no hesitation." "You hear me?" Scout huffed, tail thumping once against the concrete battle language for "I've got this." Ethan clipped the override module to Scout's vest. The small device blinked green, the only calm color in the bunker. Locke checked the timer. 001803. He paled. It accelerated. We don't have 20 minutes, we have 18. Outside hail slammed the ridge like shrapnel. The tower's support beams rang like struck anvils. Locke shouted, "Go!" Ethan and Scout bolted. The bunker door blew open under Ethan's shove, nearly ripped from its hinges by the wind. Rain hit like needles. The night sky danced with violent, light blue, white electric green. The storm pivoted over the ridge as if it knew the mountain was trying to hold it. Scout sprinted ahead, paws skidding on wet rock. Ethan followed close boots, slipping on the jagged slope. Lightning traced spiderwebs across the tower's metal frame. Static lifted the hair on Ethan's arms. The mountain was alive with power. Scout stopped at the tower's ladder and looked back. Ethan grabbed his vest, steadied him. You climb slow. You find the rod housing. You push the module into the slot. When it flashes red, you run. Understand? Scout barked low and fierce. Ethan lifted him onto the first rung, Scout gripped with practiced ease. The dog began climbing claws, hooking into the steel rung's body, angled low to stay stable. Wind screamed around them. Ethan looked up the rods at the tower's peak, glowed white-hot from the lightning hits, humming like tuning forks, seconds from shattering. He forced his voice steady. "Go, boy," Scout climbed. Every rung he cleared felt like a heartbeat ripped from Ethan's chest. At the base, Ethan activated his radio. "Locke, he's climbing." Locke's voice crackled through static. "You're in the outer turbulence zone. Make it fast, Ward. Pressure's dropping." Thunder boomed so close, Ethan had to brace against the tower to stay upright. "Scout," Ethan shouted. The dog pressed upward, silhouette small against the raging sky. Halfway up, a bolt hit the tower directly. The shockwave slammed Ethan backward. Scout nearly lost his footing but caught himself. "Go," Ethan yelled over the blast. "Keep going," the dog continued. Ethan forced himself upright, gripping the lower framework. His shoulders screamed. His ribs felt bruised by the air alone. But Scout reached the rod junction, a small metal housing halfway up. He lowered his head, tugged the override module from his vest with his teeth, and lowered it into the slot. It clicked. The module's light blinked green, then yellow, then slowly, ominously red. Scout barked. Ethan's chest flooded with adrenaline. "That's it, jump!" Go Scout leapt from the junction platform, landing on a narrow brace beam 2 levels down. The dog skidded claws, screeching on metal, nearly slipping. Ethan scrambled upward, reaching for him. Another bolt slammed the tower. Metal screamed. Scout lost his footing. "Scout!" The dog fell. Ethan threw himself under him, arms out, body braced. Scout landed hard into his chest, knocking the breath from him. They slid down the slope of gravel and mud until Ethan slammed against a boulder. Pain shot through his back like a knife, but Scout was alive, scrambling onto all fours. Ethan gasped for air, clutching the dog. Good boy. You did it." The mountain shook. Locke's voice exploded over the radio. "Ward, get back inside now the rods are dropping." Ethan scooped Scout into his arms and ran. They slammed back through the bunker door as the tower convulsed above them. Locke didn't look up from the consoles. Rod drop confirmed Vector 2. Scout limped to Ethan's side, soaking wet, panting hard. Locke's voice rose. Sync point holding Vector 1. Ethan stumbled to the screens. "Tell me what to do." Locke grabbed his wrist and slammed Ethan's palm over a slider. "Hold this. If it drops by even a millimeter, the storm rebounds." The slider fought Ethan's strength like a living thing vibrating against his grip. Locke moved to the next station, fingers trembling. Almost. Come on. The storm screamed overhead. The tower released a blast of steam. The floor trembled under them. Scout barked frantically, something beyond the human spectrum of warning. The storm cell began to shear, splitting into 2 swirling lobes on the monitor. Locke hesitated. No, this isn't right," what Ethan shouted. Locke's face drained of color. "The ridge can't hold it. Pressure's too high. We need Vector 3. Ethan froze. "What's Vector 3? Locke stared at him. "It's Clara's override." Ethan swallowed. "And where is it?" Locke pointed at the small steel storage room where her cot had been. Ethan bolted. He pushed aside crates, equipment, old notebooks until he saw it. A metal case, unlabeled. Dusty, heavy. Ethan ripped it open. Inside, a handheld trigger with Clara's initials carved into the metal. And a note: "If he ever corners, you use this. See." Ethan's breath caught. Scout pawed the floor. "Hurry." He ran back into the bunker. Locke stared at the device like it was a ghost. "How did she?" Ethan didn't wait. He snapped the trigger into the console's final port. The system screamed. The storm roared. The monitors flashed. Triangulation. Complete Vector. Release initiated dissipation. Sequence 5, 4, 3. Locke stepped back, eyes wide, with something between awe and horror. Scout pressed against Ethan. The world above them shook so violently the lights blew out. For a moment only the storm had a voice. Then boom. The pressure wave hit the mountain, but instead of slamming downward, it burst upward, straight into the sky like a cannon blast. The storm cell detonated into mist. Lightning vanished. Thunder snapped into silence. Rain fell gently. SD-27 was gone. Completely. The ridge stood. The valley stood. Locke sank into the chair. You actually did it, he whispered. You insane, brilliant, military-minded madman. Ethan leaned heavily against the console chest, heaving. We did it, he said. Clara did it. Scout did it. Scout barked tiredly. Locke wiped his face with shaky hands. I never believed there was a third option, he murmured. Ethan looked out the bunker window as the first stars appeared through the dissipating clouds. There's always a third option, he said softly. You just have to stop choosing who deserves to survive. Locke stared at him, really stared, as if seeing him for the first time. Then he whispered, I'm done. Ethan nodded. Good, now you confess. Locke shut his eyes. I will. Ethan knelt beside Scout, hands cupping the dog's face. You saved the ridge, he whispered. You saved them all. Scout nudged his chin gently, tail sweeping the floor. The storm was gone. The ridge was quiet again. The cabin ruins below would rest under a gentle dawn. Ethan let out a long, shaking breath. We finished it, Clara, he whispered into the thinning night. Locke turned off the equipment, every switch one by one, like a man shutting down his own sins. The bunker dimmed. The tower hummed its last. Scout pressed closer, warm and breathing and alive. Ethan rested a hand on the dog's shoulder. Let's go home, buddy. The mountain exhaled. The storm was over. Dawn touched the ridge slowly, like a hand afraid to wake someone who'd suffered through the night. The sky was bruised, lavender at first, then pale gold spilling across the wet stones and the scorched tower frame that still smoked faintly in the cold morning air. Ethan stood at the edge of the overlook, Scout pressed against his leg, both of them staring down into the valley far below. Cedar Run lay quiet, its rooftops, gleaming under clean, peaceful light. No flooding, no devastation, just a town preparing for an ordinary morning. The mountain breathed differently now, calmer, relieved, like a tightened wire finally loosening. Ethan exhaled a slow, full breath he felt in his ribs. You see that, he murmured. All of them. Still there. Scout looked up at him, tail giving a gentle sweep as if to say we did good. Behind them, Locke sat on a fallen beam, hands clasped between his knees. His coat was soaked. His hair hung in thin strands. For the first time since meeting him, he looked small, no storm spinning around him, no monitors to hide behind, just a man who finally saw the measure of his choices. He didn't speak. Ethan didn't push him to. Some reckonings were meant to be quiet. A soft breeze rippled through the pines, carrying the smell of wet soil and the faint metallic tang of lightning long gone. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, letting the air settle something inside him he hadn't realized was still shaking. Back when he first returned from overseas, storms had been the only thing that made sense chaos, with a patterned destruction that followed rules. Tonight shattered that old belief. Storms weren't the enemy. People were. People with fears. People with burdens. People desperate to keep control of what they never truly owned. But people could also change. Ethan opened his eyes again. I'll report everything, Locke said, finally voice low and rough. Every file, every piece of data, every decision I made. The valley will know the truth. Ethan nodded. That's a start. Locke looked at him, searching for anger or triumph. He found neither. Only exhaustion. Only purpose. You're not going to turn me in yourself? Locke asked. Ethan took a moment before answering. I'm not your judge, he said. Clara never wanted revenge. She wanted accountability. Scout stepped forward and sniffed Locke's hand, tentative measuring. Locke froze, then slowly extended his fingers. Scout accepted it, pressing his warm nose briefly to Locke's palm. A quiet absolution. A beginning, not an ending. Ethan rested a hand on Scout's back. We'll walk with you down the mountain, he said quietly. But after that, it's yours to carry. Locke nodded, eyes burning with something like understanding. They began the descent when the sun crested fully above the horizon. The storm-washed earth squished beneath their boots and paws, but every step felt lighter than the last. Birds returned to the branches. A lone raven circled overhead, then drifted toward the valley, as if ushering them forward. Halfway down, Ethan paused at a ridge where the first view of Clara's cabin appeared. Half in ruin, roof-torn, door-hanging windows shattered. A place that once held answers And ghosts. Scout sat beside him, leaning close. Ethan whispered, "She'd be proud of you." Scout rested his chin on Ethan's knee. And maybe Ethan added softly, "She'd be proud of me too." He stood a little straighter. The world didn't feel fixed, not yet, but something in it felt survivable again. They kept walking until the cabin disappeared behind the trees, and the ridge opened into a long slope that led toward the waiting day. Ethan breathed in the quiet, a quiet that wasn't the absence of storms, but the presence of peace. End.